My wife's work trip didn't add up. Her hotel camera did, and this is my real eye story. So I am Daniel Mercer, 56 years old, born and raised in the kind of middle-class American life that never makes headlines but feels solid enough to lean on. And I never imagined I'd be sitting here telling a story like this. Not because I thought my life was perfect, but because I thought it was honest. And there's a big difference between the two that I only learned the hard way. For most of my adult life, I believed I had figured things out well enough. Not brilliantly, not like those loud success stories you see online, but steady, dependable. I worked, I paid my bills, I showed up. I loved my wife Claire with a kind of quiet loyalty that doesn't shout but stays. 31 years of marriage will do that to a man. It settles you. It smooths the sharp edges. It convinces you that the world has stopped throwing surprises your way, that whatever storms are left will be small and manageable. I truly believed that chapter of my life was closed. Claire and I were not some fairy tale couple, and I never pretended we were. We argued about money, about time, about stupid little things like what to watch at night or whose turn it was to deal with the leaking sink. We went through dry spells, tired seasons, moments where love felt more like routine than fire. But underneath all of that, I believed we had trust. The kind of trust that doesn't need checking. The kind that lets you sleep through the night without wondering who's lying beside you. When she used to say, "We're unbreakable," I didn't question it. I nodded. I believed it. Because when you hit your 50s, you stop looking for excitement and start valuing peace. You want quiet mornings, familiar faces, and the comfort of knowing what comes next. You want to believe that the person who has shared your bed, your history, your failures, and your victories would never choose to burn it all down. Then came the work trip. It was such a small moment that I almost laugh thinking about it now, how something so ordinary can be the crack that brings the whole damn wall down. We were sitting at the kitchen table, eating dinner, nothing fancy, just leftovers and tired conversation. Claire mentioned it casually, barely lifting her eyes from her plate like she was talking about the weather. A 3-night work conference out of state. Company-paid hotel, tight schedule, no big deal. That's exactly how she said it. No big deal. I remember responding automatically, "No worries, love, give 'em hell." I even smiled. She smiled back, and that should have been the end of it. But it was. There was something in that smile that didn't sit right with me. Not guilt exactly, not fear. It was rushed, polished, like she wanted to move past the subject as fast as possible. It was the kind of smile people use when they don't want questions. My gut stirred just slightly, the way it does before bad weather rolls in. That quiet warning you feel before your brain catches up. But I pushed it down, because that's what loyal men do. We silence that inner voice that says, "Mate, something's off," because trusting feels better than doubting, and doubt feels like betrayal in itself. At my age, I didn't want drama. I wanted stability. I wanted to believe that after everything we'd been through, this was just another normal week in a normal life. Over the next few days, though, things started to feel uneven. Not dramatic, just off-kilter, like furniture slightly out of place in a dark room. Claire became protective of her phone in a way she never had before. She kept it face down, took it with her everywhere, bathroom, laundry room, even outside to water the plants. She booked her own hotel, which was strange because her company had always handled travel arrangements. When I asked about it, she brushed it off easily, said policies had changed. She packed clothes I had never seen her wear for work, dresses that felt too intentional, and then there were the heels. Now, anyone who knows Claire knows she hates heels, always has. She says they make her feel trapped, like she can't move freely, like she's pretending to be someone she's not. I've heard that line for decades, and yet there they were, tucked neatly into her suitcase like they mattered, like they were going somewhere important. I stood there watching her pack, feeling that same unease rise again, and again I told myself to relax. You're getting old, Dan, you're overthinking. People change. Jobs change. This is nothing. The night she left, she hugged me differently, tighter but quicker, like someone holding on to a lie and hoping it doesn't slip out. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. When it closed behind her, the house felt hollow, not empty, hollow, like it knew something I didn't yet. like it was holding its breath. That first night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay there listening to the hum of appliances, the distant sound of traffic, the familiar creaks of a house I thought I understood. Everything felt louder in her absence. Around 2 in the morning, restless and wired, I did something I had never done in 3 decades of marriage. I picked up our shared tablet, the one synced to her phone, the one we used for photos, emails, boring household stuff. I wasn't hunting for proof, not consciously. Curiosity just crept in quietly, the way it does when your instincts won't let you rest. At first there was nothing, routine notifications, normal emails, hotel welcome message. I almost put it down, feeling foolish, embarrassed with myself for even looking. Then I noticed a link in the hotel notification. Amenities, room service, gym hours, security access. I don't know why that word stuck with me. Security. Maybe because it sounded official. Maybe because my brain was already searching for answers it didn't want to find. I clicked it. The screen loaded slowly, and then there it was. A grainy live camera feed of the hotel lobby, time-stamped in real time. I actually chuckled to myself at first. Look at you, Dan, turning into some detective wannabe. I was about to close it when I saw her. Claire walked into the frame, laughing, head tilted back, hair done perfectly, makeup flawless. She wasn't alone. Her hand was wrapped around a man's arm like it belonged there, like it had done that 100 times before. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might black out. This wasn't a polite coworker greeting. This wasn't professional. This was intimacy, comfort, familiarity. They stopped near the elevator and she leaned in, whispered something that made him grin. In that moment, my entire life split in two, the before and the after. I whispered bloody hell as tears blurred the screen. I wanted to look away, I really did. But when you see the truth, you don't get to unsee it. You can't rewind your heart back to ignorance. That camera didn't just show me my wife with another man. It showed me how easily I had been replaced. How smoothly she moved in this other life. How confident she was in her deception. And that was just the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, that hotel camera showed me more than I ever wanted to know. It didn't just expose her lie. It exposed a plan, a pattern, a second life that didn't start yesterday. And what I chose to do with that knowledge didn't just change my marriage. It changed the way everyone involved would live their lives from that point on. If you're thinking this is just another cheating story, let me stop you right there. This isn't about screaming matches or broken furniture. This isn't about fists or threats. This is about patience, about quiet revenge, about the kind of justice that doesn't make noise but leaves people standing there empty-handed, wondering how they lost everything while the man they underestimated walks away calm, steady, and finally free. By the end of this, I promise you'll be asking yourself the same question that haunted me every single night after that first camera feed. How well do we really know the person sleeping beside us? And what would you do if the truth showed up without warning, without mercy, clear as day, daring you to act? Before everything fell apart, before the lies showed their teeth, before I ever looked at my wife and realized I didn't fully know the woman standing in front of me, I was just a regular 56-year-old guy living what I honestly believed was a solid, steady American life. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just the kind of life you build brick by brick over decades and assume will keep standing because you built it the right way. I worked hard for more than 30 years, the kind of work that wears your body down slowly but gives you pride when you look back. I saved when I could, cut corners when I had to, and raised 2 kids who were now grown, independent, and building lives of their own. Claire and I would sometimes sit at the kitchen table and say we made it through the hard part. That now was supposed to be the calm chapter, the reward. We met in our early 20s when neither of us had a clue what we were doing. I still remember that first apartment like it's burned into my brain. The walls smelled like old paint and stale cigarettes from whoever lived there before us. The heater rattled all night. The coffee tasted like it had been filtered through cardboard, but it was ours. We slept on a mattress on the floor for months, laughed about it, told each other someday we'd look back and miss those days. We were broke, stubborn, and in love in that raw, hungry way young people are. We dreamed big back then. About careers, about kids, about a house with a porch. Life, of course, didn't follow the script exactly. It never does. We struggled. We argued about money when there wasn't enough of it. We went weeks barely speaking sometimes, then made up like nothing happened. We survived things that should have broken us. When Claire lost her mother, I watched my strong, confident wife crumble into a grieving daughter, and I held her together as best I could. When I got laid off during the recession, I felt useless, ashamed, like I had failed my family, and she stood by me telling me we'd be okay, even when neither of us knew how. When I had my heart scare at 50, lying in a hospital bed staring at white ceilings, she sat there holding my hand like she wasn't letting go for anything in the world. That's the woman I trusted, completely. The kind of trust where questioning doesn't even cross your mind, because why would it? This was the woman who saw me weak, scared, and unsure and didn't turn away. She used to tell people I was a rock, and I believed her because I tried every day to be exactly that. I wasn't perfect, but I was loyal, steady, present. So when Claire said she had a work trip coming up, I didn't push. I didn't question. Trust was our language. It was how we operated. Asking for proof or details would have felt insulting, like accusing her of something unthinkable. That's how deep my belief ran. I thought we had earned that kind of trust through time and shared pain and shared victories. Looking back now, that's what scares me the most. How easy it was to ignore the signs once I had convinced myself betrayal was possible in my life. There were changes, sure, but I explained them away like any man who doesn't want to rock the boat. Claire started caring more about how she looked before leaving town. New clothes, more time in front of the mirror, a different confidence in the way she moved. I told myself she was feeling good about herself, that it was healthy. She talked more about younger coworkers, dropped their names casually, laughed a little too hard at stories that didn't seem that funny. I told myself it was just work talk, office culture. Intimacy between us slowly faded, not all at once, not in a way that screamed danger, just less frequent, less urgent, less connected. I blamed age, routine, stress. I told myself this is what long marriages look like. Comfortable, predictable. I never once said the word betrayal out loud in my head, because betrayal was something that happened to other people, to strangers on the internet, to men who weren't paying attention or weren't good husbands, not to someone like me. Not after 31 years. The night before she left on that trip, she kissed me goodnight and said love you like she always did, but something about it felt rehearsed, like a line read from a script she'd practiced in her head. I remember lying there after she fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, feeling uneasy without fully understanding why. I should have stopped her right then, should have asked the questions I was too afraid to ask, should have said, something feels off, talk to me. But I didn't. Because comfort makes cowards of us all. I chose peace over truth in that moment, and I paid for it later. Once I saw that first hotel camera clip, something inside me flipped so fast it felt physical, like a switch being thrown in a dark room, and suddenly every corner was lit up whether I wanted to see it or not. I didn't become angry right away. I didn't shout or throw things or punch walls like you see in movies. What I became was alert in a way I hadn't been in years. Sharp. Awake. It was like my brain had been sleepwalking for decades, and that grainy black and white footage shook it violently awake. I sat there in the quiet house, the tablet glowing in my hands, refreshing the feed again and again, not because I enjoyed the pain, but because I couldn't stop myself. It was the same feeling you get when you slow down to look at a bad accident on the highway, even though every part of you knows you shouldn't. Claire and the man, the one I would later learn was named Victor, moved through that hotel like it was familiar territory. Not like guests, not like coworkers killing time between meetings, like people who belonged there, like it was a routine they had walked through many times before. I watched them meet in the lobby early in the morning, coffee cups in hand, standing close enough that strangers would assume they were a couple without a second thought. They laughed easily, leaned toward each other when they talked. Touched casually, confidently, the way people do when there is no fear of being caught. Later that same day, my phone buzzed with a text from Claire. She complained about long meetings and boring presentations, said she was exhausted and heading back to her room early. I remember reading that message while watching the live feed show her stepping into the elevator beside him, dressed up, smiling wide, her body language alive and energetic. There was no exhaustion in her movements, no stress. She looked lighter than she had at home in years. That contrast hit me harder than the images themselves. The lie wasn't just that she was with another man. The lie was the version of herself she showed me versus the woman she became with him. As the hours passed, patterns emerged. They met at the same times, took the same routes, returned late at night, sometimes minutes apart, sometimes together. They shared jokes, inside jokes by the looks of it, the kind that only makes sense when you've spent a lot of time together. And what twisted the knife deeper than anything else was how natural it all seemed. There was no hesitation in her steps, no flicker of guilt when she looked around the lobby, no nervous checking of cameras or surroundings. She wasn't sneaking, she was living. That was when it truly sank in. This wasn't new. This wasn't a one-time mistake made during a moment of weakness or loneliness. This was routine. This was practiced. This was a second life running parallel to mine. And once that thought took hold, my mind started moving backward through the years, replaying moments I had ignored or explained away because it was easier than facing what they might mean. Trips I never questioned suddenly felt heavier. Weekends where she said she needed space or time to herself. Mood swings that came out of nowhere and left just as quickly. Nights when she seemed distant, distracted, already somewhere else while sitting right beside me. I had chalked it all up to stress, to age, to the natural drift that happens in long marriages. Now those memories lined up like puzzle pieces snapping into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't deny. The hardest realization wasn't that I was losing her. It was that I had already lost her slowly, quietly, while she slept beside me and shared meals with me and talked about retirement plans like they meant something. She didn't leave all at once. She faded out over time, and I helped her do it by refusing to ask questions. Strangely, that realization didn't make me furious at first. It made me ashamed. Ashamed that I ignored my instincts. Ashamed that I prided myself on being wise and experienced and emotionally intelligent, yet let myself be played so easily. Ashamed that I mistook silence for peace and trust for safety. I sat there watching those feeds, feeling smaller than I ever had, realizing that loyalty without awareness isn't strength, it's vulnerability. And then something else happened. The more I watched, the calmer I became. The initial shock wore off and was replaced by something colder, steadier. Rage burns fast. It flares up and destroys everything in its path, including the person holding it. But clarity is different. Clarity settles in quietly. It sharpens your thoughts. It slows your breathing. It gives you control. And as painful as it was to watch those patterns repeat over and over, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being blind. On the second night, sometime just after midnight, the house felt heavier than it had the night before, like the walls themselves were leaning in, listening. I sat alone in the living room with all the lights off, the tablet glowing in my hands, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I told myself I was done watching, that I already knew enough, that nothing good could come from seeing more. And yet my thumb kept tapping refresh like it had a mind of its own. That's the thing about the truth when it starts to surface. Part of you wants it to stop, and another part needs it to finish tearing you apart so you can finally understand where you stand. That was when I saw them step into the elevator together. It was a simple thing, really. No drama, no rushing. Just the two of them walking side by side, close enough that their arms brushed, her head tilted slightly toward him as if they were still in conversation. The elevator doors slid open, they stepped inside, and then the doors closed, just like that. Gone. The screen went still, empty lobby, nothing moving. And I sat there in the dark knowing exactly what was happening on the other side of that closed door. My chest felt tight, not like a sharp pain, but like something heavy was sitting right on top of it, pressing down slowly. I could barely breathe. Still, some stubborn part of me refused to fully accept it. My heart was bargaining, grasping for any explanation that would let me off the hook from reality. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe they were just coworkers staying on the same floor. Maybe I was misreading it. Maybe. When you've built your life around a belief, your mind will fight like hell to protect it, even when the evidence is right in front of you. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat there until the sky outside began to lighten, staring at nothing, replaying old memories in my head like a broken record. Our wedding day, the birth of our kids, the nights we stayed up talking about the future. All of it felt unreal now, like scenes from someone else's life. I kept telling myself that if I just waited, if I just saw one more thing, I'd know for sure. I'd stop guessing. I'd stop hopping. The next morning, as if the universe decided to show no mercy, another camera angle loaded on the screen. Hallway footage. The timestamp told me it was early, just after sunrise, and there she was. Claire stepped into view barefoot, wearing a shirt that clearly wasn't hers. It hung loose on her frame, the fabric brushing against her thighs as she walked. She was laughing quietly, the kind of laugh you use when you don't want to wake anyone nearby. She looked relaxed, happy, younger. They stood outside his door, talking for a moment like there was nowhere else either of them needed to be. Then she leaned in and kissed him, not rushed, not desperate, calm, confident, familiar. When she turned and headed toward the stairs, adjusting that shirt like it belonged to her, my legs gave out. I slid down against the wall and ended up sitting on the floor, the tablet still in my hands, my vision blurring so badly I could barely see the screen. It felt like someone had punched me clean in the gut and knocked every ounce of air out of my body. 31 years. 31 years of shared life reduced to a grainy black and white clip playing on repeat in my hands. What hurt more than the kiss wasn't the act itself. It was the confidence in it. She wasn't sneaking. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't scared. She was comfortable. She was living a second life with the ease of someone who had been doing it for a long time, and I wasn't even a villain in that life. I wasn't an obstacle. I was just the background character. The man who paid the bills, kept the house warm, made things stable so she could step outside and feel alive. I remember whispering to myself, barely loud enough to hear, "This is real, Dan. This is really happening." Saying it out loud made it impossible to deny anymore. There was no misunderstanding left. No story I could tell myself to soften the blow. The truth stood there, plain and brutal, and I had no choice but to face it. I cried. I won't pretend I didn't. The tears came hard and fast, years of unspoken fear and disappointment pouring out all at once. But something strange happened after that. When the tears finally dried, there was no explosion, no urge to grab my phone and call her screaming, no desire to drive to that hotel and confront them both like a man out of control. Instead, there was a quiet stillness, a decision forming slowly, deliberately. I realized in that moment that confronting her right away would only give her control of the story. It would let her twist the truth, minimize it, turn herself into the victim. I would become the angry husband, the unreasonable one, the man who overreacted. I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to beg for explanations or apologies that meant nothing. I wasn't going to bleed all over the floor for someone who had already stepped over me. I decided I would let her finish her lie. Because the longer people lie, the deeper the hole they dig for themselves. And I was done pulling her out of holes she created. I would stay quiet. I would watch. I would gather everything I needed. And when the time came, when the truth finally surfaced in the light, she would have nothing left to hide behind. The days that followed were the strangest of my life, not because anything dramatic happened on the surface, but because everything inside me had changed while the world around me stayed the same. I spoke to Claire on the phone like I always had. I laughed at the right moments. I asked about her day, about the conference, about the food, about the weather in whatever city she claimed to be buried in meetings. I told her I missed her. And she answered with the same smooth, practiced words she had clearly rehearsed long before she ever left the house. She said she missed me too. She said she was tired. She said work was stressful, and every time she spoke, every time another lie slipped out of her mouth without effort, something inside me grew steadier instead of angrier. I expected to feel rage. I expected my hands to shake, my voice to crack, my thoughts to spiral out of control. But that didn't happen. What I felt was focus. Each lie didn't weaken me, it strengthened my resolve. It confirmed that staying quiet was the right move, that confronting her too early would only muddy the water and give her room to manipulate the truth. Silence, I learned, is a powerful thing when the other person has no idea you know everything. While she talked, I listened differently, not like a husband waiting to respond, but like a man gathering information. I noticed how easily the words came to her, how she never hesitated, how her tone stayed light and believable. That told me this wasn't new for her. Lying had become comfortable, and comfort breeds mistakes. I spent those days planning, but not in the way people imagine when they hear the word revenge. There was no anger-fueled plotting, no fantasies of confrontation or humiliation. This wasn't about hurting her. This was about protecting myself, about justice built on patience. I gathered evidence quietly and methodically, the way a man does when he knows emotions can't be trusted but facts can. I took screenshots of the hotel footage, saved timestamps, recorded calls, archived messages. Everything labeled, organized, backed up, because I understood something very clearly now. Truth without proof is just noise, and noise can be dismissed. Proof cannot. At night, when the house was quiet and the memories tried to creep in, I reminded myself that this wasn't weakness. This was discipline. Staying calm wasn't letting her win. It was denying her the chaos she would have used to rewrite the story. I also did something else I never thought I'd do. I consulted a lawyer, quietly, carefully. No drama, no accusations, just facts. I sat in a small office and laid out my life piece by piece, the marriage, the assets, the years, the evidence. I listened more than I spoke. I learned my options. I learned what was protected and what was vulnerable. I learned what she might assume she could take and what she legally couldn't touch. And with every answer I received, something heavy lifted off my chest. Knowledge brings control, and control is powerful. It steadies your hands. It slows your breathing. It keeps your voice level when everything in your past tells you to shout. Control lets you think 3 steps ahead while someone else is still dancing in the dark, convinced they're winning. By the time Claire's trip was coming to an end, I felt like a different man than the one who watched that first camera feed. I wasn't numb. I wasn't broken. I was grounded. I knew where I stood. I knew what I would do next. And most importantly, I knew what I would not do. I would not explode. I would not accuse. I would not tip my hand before the time was right. When she finally came home 3 days later, I heard her car in the driveway and felt nothing but calm. She walked through the door smiling, carrying her bag like she always did, leaning in to hug me as if nothing had happened. She smelled like hotel soap and something else I didn't recognize, a scent that didn't belong in my home. She wrapped her arms around me, and for a split second, I saw clearly how easy it would be to step back, to expose everything right there. Instead, I hugged her back. Not because I forgave her, not because I was confused, but because the game was already in motion, and she had no idea. The weeks that followed were a test of discipline I never knew I had in me. Every morning I woke up beside Claire and reminded myself that the man she thought she knew no longer existed in the same way. I played my role carefully, almost flawlessly. I was the trusting husband again, the steady presence, the man who listened when she talked about work and nodded at the right moments. I asked about her days. I smiled when she joked. I touched her shoulder when it felt expected. And all the while, inside me, there was a quiet countdown ticking away. Living like that wasn't easy. There were moments when her casual lies made my stomach tighten, moments when I wanted to ask how she could look me in the eye and speak so easily. But I didn't, because every normal interaction lulled her deeper into comfort, and comfort makes people careless. I watched her closely during those weeks, not like a jealous husband but like a man studying a stranger. She seemed lighter than before, more relaxed, almost confident in a way that hadn't been there in years. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Guilt usually leaves a mark. Fear changes behavior, but she carried herself like someone who believed she had gotten away with something, like someone who thought the story was already written and finished. That's when I decided it was time. I invited her to a small family dinner, nothing dramatic, no big announcement. I told her it would just be us and the kids catching up, having a quiet evening together. I said I missed having everyone around the table. She agreed without hesitation. Of course she did. Liars love normal settings. They feel safest when everything looks familiar. The day of the dinner I prepared quietly. I made sure the tablet was fully charged, connected to the television, positioned just right so there would be no fumbling, no delays. I tested it twice when no one was home. Everything worked perfectly. I wanted no distractions, no technical issues, nothing that would break the moment once it began. When the kids arrived, the house filled with voices and laughter, and for a brief moment it almost felt like the life I thought I was still intact. Claire moved through the kitchen easily, smiling, joking, playing her role like she always had. She looked relaxed, confident, completely unaware. And watching her like that, I understood something important. She never suspected me, not once. She believed I was still blind, still trusting, still safely unaware of the truth. We sat at the table and ate together. We talked about work, about life, about small things that didn't matter anymore. I barely touched my food, but no one noticed. My heart was steady, not racing, not shaking. That surprised me. I thought this moment would terrify me. Instead, it grounded me, because I wasn't acting out of anger. I was acting out of clarity. As dessert was being cleared, I felt the moment settle in the room. That quiet space between conversations. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping lightly against the floor. Everyone looked at me. Claire smiled, waiting, expecting something harmless. I said her name calmly, just her name, Claire. I told her there was something I needed to show everyone. My voice didn't shake, I didn't raise it. I spoke the way a man speaks when he knows exactly what he's doing. And in that instant I saw it. The color drained from her face so fast it was unmistakable, like some part of her already knew what was coming, even if she didn't fully understand how. Her eyes flicked toward the television, then back to me. Just for a second, but it was enough. I turned on the screen. The room went quiet as the footage began to play. The hotel lobby, the timestamp, Claire walking into frame with him. Laughter, touches, elevators, hallways. Each clip rolled seamlessly into the next. No commentary, no accusations, just truth, unfiltered and undeniable. You could hear breathing in the room, nothing else. With every passing second, her lies peeled away layer by layer. The confident smile vanished. The relaxed posture collapsed. The woman who had walked into that room certain of her story had nowhere left to stand. There were no explanations that could fix what everyone was seeing. No words that could rewrite it. The truth doesn't argue. It just exists. And as the footage continued, I stood there silently, knowing that everything I had carried alone for weeks was finally in the open, exactly where it belonged. For a few seconds after the footage stopped playing, no one moved. The screen went dark, reflecting our faces back at us like a cruel mirror, and the silence sat heavy in the room. Claire was the first to break it. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, like the words had lined up and suddenly abandoned her. When she tried again, her voice came out thin and uneven, reaching for explanations that didn't exist anymore. She started with my name, said it softly, like she could pull me back into the old version of myself just by saying it the right way. Then she talked about misunderstandings, about context, about stress and mistakes. The usual phrases people grab when the truth has already cornered them. But none of it mattered. Truth doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need framing or justification. It stands on its own, heavy and complete. And every word she spoke only made that clearer. Watching her crumble wasn't satisfying the way people imagine revenge to be. There was no rush of victory, no pleasure in her pain, What I felt was something quieter and heavier, like watching someone drown in choices they had made themselves while realizing there was nothing left you could do to save them. My kids sat there stunned, their faces frozen between disbelief and heartbreak. I saw anger flare in my son's eyes, confusion and hurt tear through my daughter like a wave. They looked from the screen to their mother to me, trying to understand how the world they trusted could fracture so completely in one evening. That hurt more than anything else. Not my pride, not my marriage, but knowing that her choices had reached out and cut into them too. I didn't shout, I didn't insult her, I didn't call her names or list every sacrifice I had ever made. I simply stated facts, calmly, clearly. I told her what I knew, what I had seen, what I had documented. I spoke like a man reading from a finished report, not like someone looking for a reaction. And that calm did something shouting never could. It terrified her, because it showed her I wasn't fighting to keep her. I wasn't bargaining, I wasn't desperate, I was already gone. She cried then, real tears finally. She tried to step toward me, reached out like she had 1,000 times before in moments of stress, like muscle memory. I stepped back without thinking, not dramatically, not angrily, just enough to create space. And in that movement everything was said. Some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Some damage doesn't heal with apologies or time. The conversation ended the way these things often do, not with resolution but with exhaustion. No one knew what else to say. The kids left quietly, each of them hugging me in a way that told me they understood more than they could put into words. Claire stood there for a long time after the door closed, looking around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. The house that had been her safety net. The life she thought would always be waiting for her. That night she packed her bags. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just the sound of zippers and drawers opening and closing. She didn't try to argue again. She didn't ask me to stop her. When she walked past me toward the door, she looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her choices had finally settled in. She left without another word. When the door closed behind her, the house fell quiet again. But this time it wasn't hollow. It was peaceful, like the air had finally been cleared of something toxic I hadn't realized I was breathing in for years. I stood there alone, listening to that quiet, and for the first time since everything began, I felt something close to relief. The weeks that followed felt strange at first, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis and I was learning to stand in a new gravity. The house, once heavy with secrets and silence, felt lighter, almost breathable. There were no more lies echoing off the walls, no guessing games about texts or late-night messages, no whispers of what could be happening when I wasn't looking. The air felt clean, though tinged with the residue of all that had passed, and for the first time in decades, I could breathe without the weight of suspicion pressing down on me. I finalized the separation quietly, deliberately, like a man closing the cover on a book he never wants to read again. Financials were secured, accounts sorted, assets accounted for, all done without fanfare. It wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about making sure I had the ground beneath me solid and unmoving. I consulted with professionals, read contracts, double-checked everything, and with each step I felt a measure of control returning to me. Control is a strange thing. You can't buy it, and it isn't given freely. But once you have it again, it restores something inside you that fear and deception stole. Every day I focused on healing, not through drinking or distractions or trying to bury the pain under noise. I walked, I breathed. I sat quietly on the porch, sometimes just staring at the yard, sometimes watching the sun rise or fall with no agenda. I reminded myself who I was outside of being a husband, a father, a man defined by a marriage that had been shattered. Rediscovering myself in that quiet way was like slowly piecing together a mosaic you didn't know had been broken, finding the edges, the colors, the patterns that belonged to you and only you. Betrayal, I realized, says more about the betrayer than the betrayed. The act itself is a mirror reflecting their choices, their weaknesses, their greed, their disregard for what they once held sacred. I didn't need to chase her down, or expose her publicly, or scream about what she had done. The consequences would find her naturally. People see truth in small things. Her absence at holidays, the way her excuses no longer held weight, the realization that her family and friends would look at her differently once the facade crumbled. And dignity, that quiet, understated dignity, became my greatest revenge. I walked through my life upright and composed. I smiled when appropriate, laughed at jokes, went about my days as if nothing had shattered me entirely, even though I carried the scars privately. And that silent strength was a kind of punishment she could not anticipate. While she lost her family, her stability, the sense of respect she had enjoyed in our circle, I gained something she could never touch: clarity, freedom, and self-respect. Sleep returned to me in ways I hadn't felt in years, not the restless, half-dreaming kind where nightmares creep into reality, but deep, steady sleep. The kind that lets your body remember what rest feels like, the kind that restores both mind and soul. Each morning, I woke with no knots in my stomach, no gnawing doubts, just the steady heartbeat of someone who had reclaimed himself. I spent afternoons in my garden, tending to plants that needed attention, watching them grow, realizing that growth doesn't always need grand gestures. Small, steady effort yields life. I read books I had ignored for decades. I revisited hobbies I had shelved because I didn't have time or energy, because family obligations or work consumed me. Painting, woodworking, even long drives with no destination. Things that reminded me of the man I'd been before life's weight piled on my shoulders. Friends reached out cautiously at first, aware of the rupture in my personal life. I welcomed their company in measured doses, not out of need but because human connection is part of living, part of healing. We laughed, we talked, we didn't dwell on betrayal, we existed alongside it. And each interaction reminded me that life still held warmth, still offered unexpected moments of joy even after devastation. And through it all, I learned a lesson I hope I never forget, that self-respect cannot be taken by anyone else unless you allow it. The pain, the heartbreak, the anger, all of it was real and heavy, but it didn't define me. I defined me. And that realization, that reclaiming yourself in the aftermath of someone else's deception, is more satisfying than any revenge I could have imagined. So when the nights grew quiet, the house still and empty in the ways it had never been before, I slept, truly slept. No more haunted dreams, no more gnawing doubts, just peace, solid, unwavering, earned peace. And in that peace I finally felt free. Free to live, free to breathe, free to be myself again, and free to let the world move forward without the weight of her lies pressing down on every step. The aftermath in the end was not a collapse or a disaster, but a clearing of the fog. A chance to rebuild on foundations I chose myself. And in that rebuilding, I discovered strength I had never acknowledged before, quiet power and patience, and the unshakable truth that life goes on, but only if you allow yourself to walk forward, head held high, no longer tethered to someone else's choices. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm that was both unfamiliar and profoundly liberating. I sat on that same porch I had once shared with Claire, the wood worn and sun-bleached, the scent of morning dew mingling with coffee steam curling in the cold air. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and for the first time in decades I noticed it, really noticed it, without anyone else's shadow coloring the view. My hands wrapped around the mug, warm against the morning chill, and I realized something profound. Life does not end at 56. It doesn't come with an expiration date, and it doesn't stop because someone betrayed you. Life restarts if you allow it to, and I was allowing it. I reconnected with old friends, men and women who had drifted out of my life over the years, relationships quietly pushed aside by the weight of family obligations, work, and the slow suffocation of compromise. They were surprised to hear from me at first, cautious, uncertain if I was the same man they had known or a stranger wearing his skin. I let them be surprised. We met for coffee, for long walks, for evenings spent talking about nothing and everything at once. Laughter returned in its unforced form, light and unpredictable, not tied to expectation or habit. Those relationships reminded me of a part of myself I had forgotten, the curious, unguarded, irreverent part that had loved life simply because it existed. Hobbies, once shelved and ignored for years, became a refuge. I picked up my old camera and began taking pictures of things I had never truly seen before. The curve of a tree branch in the morning light, a stray dog wandering through the park, the intricate patterns of frost on a car window. I painted, my hands shaky at first, unsure how to translate decades of pent-up emotion onto canvas, but gradually the colors became bolder, the strokes more confident, and with every finished piece, I felt pieces of myself return. Woodworking became another kind of meditation, shaping raw, unyielding material into objects of beauty and function. Each finished project reminded me that creation, not destruction, is where real power lies. Travel became a ritual of self-discovery. I wandered through cities I had only ever passed through in passing, stayed in hotels where no one knew me, and walked streets without expectations, without obligations, without the heavy presence of someone else's choices shaping my path. I discovered that the world, with all its unpredictability and imperfection, is breathtaking when you experience it alone, with no compromise required. Cafes became offices of observation, train rides became journeys through thought and reflection, and every sunrise over a foreign horizon whispered that freedom was real and within reach. Sometimes, inevitably, my thoughts drifted to her, Claire, not with the sharp sting of betrayal or the heat of anger, but with a quiet, reflective acceptance. I reminded myself that clinging to rage only chains you to the past. It keeps you turning over memories that no longer serve you, replaying actions that cannot be undone, and living in shadows that were never yours to carry. I refused to be chained anymore. Anger was a leash she had unknowingly held, and now I had cut it, leaving myself unbound. I learned slowly and painfully that moving forward isn't about forgetting. It isn't about pretending what happened didn't leave its mark. It's about acknowledging the pain, letting it settle where it belongs, and then choosing not to let it dictate the rest of your life. I found strength in routine, in discipline, in the quiet certainty that I belonged to myself first, always. The choices I made were mine. Every walk, every coffee, every sunrise I watched was a reminder that autonomy is the foundation of peace. As months turned into a full year, I began to see the difference in myself. My posture changed. My steps carried more purpose. My voice had a steadiness I hadn't felt since I was young. I smiled freely, laughed easily, and even found joy in the mundane because there was no hidden tension in my life anymore, no double meanings, no covert games. Every day was honest. Every decision was mine. I built a life that was not an echo of the one I had lost, but a life that belonged fully to me. And in that life, I discovered something I had forgotten in 31 years of marriage. Peace doesn't come from winning or punishing. Peace comes from reclaiming yourself, from understanding that the past cannot be changed, but the present is yours to shape. At night, I sat on that porch again, watching stars emerge one by one, sipping coffee or sometimes nothing at all, listening to the quiet of the world without the background noise of deceit. And I realized that happiness, real and unshakable, isn't something someone can take from you. It's something you build quietly, patiently, moment by moment, until the weight of the past no longer matters and the horizon is entirely your own. I was 56 years old, and for the first time in decades, I felt the thrilling clarity of a life fully mine. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end was actually the beginning. The door that slammed behind her wasn't the closing of my world, it was the opening of it. And for the first time, I was walking through it with open eyes, open heart, and no chains to hold me back.
If there is one lesson I carry from all of this, it is both simple and profound. Trust is sacred, but blind trust is dangerous. For 31 years, I believed in a life that felt stable, in a woman I thought I knew completely, and in a marriage that seemed unshakable. And for 31 years, I ignored the small voices, the subtle signs, the instincts that whispered quietly in the back of my mind whenever something felt off. We are taught to trust, to forgive, to believe the people closest to us, and there is merit in that. But there is also danger in giving that trust without question, without awareness, without paying attention to the way the world moves around you. Trust is a gift, but instincts are your guide. They are there to protect you, even when it feels inconvenient to listen to them. What I learned in the cold, silent nights of watching a tablet flicker with the life my wife had hidden from me is that ignoring those instincts can cost you everything. Not just possessions, not just time or energy, but pieces of yourself you didn't even realize you were giving away. I trusted blindly because it was easier. I trusted blindly because I believed comfort and loyalty were enough to keep someone faithful, and I paid the price for that belief. But the story doesn't end there. It doesn't end with betrayal or loss or heartbreak. The story continues in how you respond, and I chose, painfully but deliberately, to walk forward with clarity, to choose dignity over revenge, patience over anger, truth over illusion. I chose myself. Because what the hotel camera showed me, grainy and cold and unyielding, wasn't just her actions. It was a reflection of a reality I had ignored. And once you see the truth, once you face it unflinchingly, you have only one responsibility: to believe it and act in alignment with it, to protect your own peace, your own life, your own self-respect. Walking away was not easy. It wasn't a dramatic scene filled with yelling or confrontation, but that quiet, calm departure was far more powerful than any argument could have been, because it wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from me: my freedom, my dignity, my sense of control over my own life. Some people will argue that forgiveness is the path to peace, but I discovered that peace can come from many places. Sometimes it comes from clarity, sometimes from patience, sometimes from letting someone reveal themselves fully before making your move. The lesson is not vengeance. It's awareness, it's self-preservation, it's courage. I also learned that betrayal says more about the person who betrays than the person who is betrayed. Her choices, her ease in lying, her comfort in duplicity, they reflected her character, not mine. The pain was mine to endure, yes, but it did not define me. And that realization was liberating. It meant that the damage she did to my life was not permanent unless I allowed it to be. I could rebuild. I could live fully. I could walk into the future unbound by her deception. Finally, I learned that peace is worth far more than any relationship built on lies, regardless of how long it lasted or how much you invested in it. 31 years of my life could not be undone, and yes, the memories remain. But the future, that precious stretch of time ahead, belongs entirely to me now. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. It is the quiet, steady act of survival, of self-respect, and ultimately of wisdom. Sometimes the truth does not arrive through confessions, apologies, or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes in the most unexpected, mundane, and coldly factual forms, like a quiet hotel camera capturing a reality you never imagined, showing you exactly who someone really is. And when that happens, you have two choices: deny it, cling to illusions, and continue living in a shadow that isn't yours, or accept it, internalize it, and choose yourself. I chose the latter. And that choice, painful and deliberate as it was, changed everything. It taught me patience, restraint, and the power of silent strength. It taught me that you do not need to destroy someone to rise from betrayal. Sometimes, rising simply means standing steady while the world reveals itself exactly as it is, and walking away with your dignity intact. It taught me that your peace, your self-respect, and your life are worth infinitely more than any relationship, no matter how long it lasted, built on deceit and lies. So here is the moral, plain and unvarnished. Listen to your instincts. Protect your peace. Watch carefully, act deliberately, and never be afraid to choose yourself. Because when the truth is laid bare, whether through confession, evidence, or something as unexpected as a grainy camera feed, you must believe it, accept it, and move forward unchained, unafraid, and unbroken. In the end, the story isn't about betrayal and it isn't about loss. It's about what you do with the truth once you see it. It's about reclaiming your life, your freedom, and your dignity. And that, I discovered at 56 years old, is a kind of victory far more powerful than revenge, far more lasting than anger, far more liberating than anything else life could offer. So I chose myself. And in that choice I found a new beginning, a quiet strength, and a peace I had never known I deserved.